Members of Australia's Jewish community have hailed a shift in the Abbott government's policy in relations with Israel. The Attorney-General, George Brandis, has signalled that he will drop the word occupied in references to East Jerusalem. Critics argue the move will put Australia out of step with the United Nations. The Arab community is now appealing to Joe Hockey for support, given the Treasurer has Palestinian roots. Jason Om reports.
Occupied or not occupied? That was the question about East Jerusalem during a rowdy 2 days of Senate estimates this week.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Vargas, why did the Australian ambassador to Israel attend a meeting in occupied East Jerusalem with the Israeli Minister for Housing and Construction, the same minister who is forecasting a 50% increase in settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories in the next 5 years?
Do you want me to say that, or will you say that?
I think I should say, Senator Rhiannon, that the rather tendentious way in which you put that question, and in particular the use of the word occupied, is not something that the Australian government of either political persuasion acknowledges or accepts.
So you don't use the term occupied Palestinian territories, even though it's a United Nations term used widely by a number of international agencies, European Union,
it's used by a lot of people. It's used by a lot of communists too. Weren't you a member of the Communist Party once?
Come on, answer the question, Senator Brandis. You are using your usual tactics to insult people when you're hard up for an answer.
I thought you were very proud of being a member of the Communist Party.
You've taken over an hour to avoid talking about Palestine, and you've been asked a very simple, direct question, and you're again not allowing the Department to speak.
I've just observed that you have asked a tendentious question which contains a lot of very, very, very controversial assumptions, and the Australian government of either coalition or Labor political persuasions does not adopt that description of those territories. A lot of people do, including, obviously, people like you.
The next day, the Attorney-General clarified Australia's position in a statement from the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop.
The description of East Jerusalem as occupied East Jerusalem is a term freighted with pejorative implications, which is neither appropriate nor useful. It should not and will not be the practice of the Australian government to describe areas of negotiation in such judgmental language.
Israel captured East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. Both sides claimed Jerusalem as their capital.
We don't think it's helpful to name it occupied East Jerusalem when in fact it is the subject of a negotiated peace settlement between the two sides.
The news has been praised by Israel and welcomed by many in the Jewish community at home.
I think what it does do is show Australia is both a moral and political leader on this issue by trying to zero in on the real situation and actually trying to take some emotion and a prejudgment of the issue out of the equation, which in recent times has only impeded the prospects of advancing the negotiations. Look at the record, it's not very good. So clinging to this outmoded, destructive stereotyping of alleged occupation of Palestinian territories has been totally unhelpful and destructive to reaching a satisfactory mutual compromise.
But one former foreign minister says it's out of line with the position of successive Australian governments.
No other country is saying this. Not the United States, none of the Europeans, none of the close friends of Israel like Canada. No one has said that East Jerusalem is not occupied.
Bob Carr says it's worrying that the argument could be applied to other areas like Bethlehem or other cities in the West Bank.
It's a shocking lurch from a policy that's been bipartisan, a policy that's recognised in international law, that reflects international law.
Australia may be out of step with UN resolutions and other countries, but it's in step with political, historical and legal reality. So I think this is really a breath of fresh air.
Middle Eastern issues are very complex, but we think that the government should step through these processes rather than pull surprises on people.
So are you comfortable or not?
Well, I think that it's more a process issue for the government.
The row could leave some sitting Liberal MPs in Western Sydney uneasy, and perhaps also the Treasurer.
I am proud of my Palestinian heritage. I am proud of the fact that my father was born in Palestine and came to Australia.
I think he should be talking to our foreign minister about the issues.
The Arab community is furious.
The resolution is to have a Palestinian state on 1967 border and with East Jerusalem as its capital. That's what we want Joe Hockey to be talking to his members in government.
The Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank are growing, with plans for 1,500 new units. Jason Om, Late Line.
First, Dr. Colin Rubenstein, Executive Director of the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, says he's encouraged by the development. Colin Rubenstein, you've stated in a recent opinion piece that you agree with the Israeli government taking a principled position in its peace negotiations with the Palestinians, and that position is that it is not constructive to declare the West Bank settlements illegal. So you must be pleased with the Australian government's decision not to describe these areas of negotiation as occupied.
Well, I think it's a constructive move by the Australian government, because the focus is really on encouraging the parties to engage in meaningful, substantive negotiations to achieve a two-state outcome. And so reinforcing any sort of logic that, the settlements are absolutely illegal and the source of the major problem, and gobbling up territory that makes a Palestinian state impossible, really only reinforces Palestinian unwillingness to negotiate seriously and the general irredentist approach, because that simply is not the case. There's been no geographic expansion of the Israeli settlements for the last decade since the agreement between Prime Minister Sharon and President Bush.
That's in dispute, though, isn't it?
No. Well, some people claim there is. The ever-expanding, the imagery of ever-expanding settlements gobbling up Palestinian land, but that is not the case.
Well, you can't make it a statement of fact because it is in dispute.
The expansion, as a matter of empirical reality, is overwhelmingly within settlements that are likely to remain part of Israel under any conceivable two-state outcome, and those settlements take up less than 2% of the West Bank territory. So yes, there's population growth within existing settlements, but there has been no geographic expansion of settlements over the last decade.
Well, let me stop you there. Obviously, much has been written and debated on Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. But as I understand it, the UN Security Council Resolution 478 declared Israel's move to define Jerusalem as the complete and united capital of Israel to be null and void, and that the international community does not recognise Israeli sovereignty over East Jerusalem. Would you agree that that is the widely accepted principle of most countries?
There's a widespread view that is the case, but there was once a widespread view that the earth was flat. That doesn't make it correct, because these claims overwhelmingly are rooted in politics rather than any definitive international law. There are differing opinions about the status of Jerusalem under international law. Many prominent legal scholars agree that Israel's claim to sovereignty over united Jerusalem has the most legitimacy. And really, that's because Israel legitimately filled the sovereignty vacuum left after Britain's 1948 withdrawal, when unlawful Arab armed aggression effectively invalidated the partition proposal of the time. So this sovereignty vacuum was filled by Israel in Western Jerusalem when it came under Israel's control in 1948, and in Eastern Jerusalem in 1967, when Israel replaced Jordanian occupation as the result of self-defensive actions. You see, Israel's control of East Jerusalem came about through self-defense and not aggressive actions. It therefore constituted a lawful occupation, and really no other claimant possesses a legitimate title. Look, the Israelis, of course, effectively annexed East Jerusalem in 1967, and that was consolidated by the Basic Law of July 1980. And therefore, Israel's claim legally is strong, and the real issue here, of course, is that the suburbs in East Jerusalem, like Gillow, established in 1971, are clearly part of any conceivable two-state outcome that the parties have negotiated and would agree on, and effectively were conceded in the Arafat period. And this is where, of course, the growth in settlements is overwhelmingly taking place, within those effective suburbs of Jerusalem, which have great historical, religious, cultural, and very much security implications for Israel. But remember, I just want to point out that on two occasions, under Prime Minister Barak in the year 2000 and under Prime Minister Olmert in the year 2007, in the negotiations that took place on each occasion, Israel did offer a capital to the Palestinians as part of those negotiations, and that capital in East Jerusalem was never responded to or rejected on both of those occasions.
Well, look, no one would deny your impressive grip on the detail of this, but if we go back to the point at hand, which is the Australian government deciding that it will no longer use the term occupied territory in relation to Israeli settlements, is that a sign that Australia has taken sides in this two-party solution, in this two-state solution, that it can no longer declare that it supports a two-state solution? It's siding with Israel.
No, I think that's absurd. I mean, what Australia has done is effectively a very useful corrective to focus attention on the real issues and to encourage the parties to come back to serious and substantial negotiations, particularly on the Palestinian side. Because the name of the game there obviously is not to come back to negotiations, but pursue, lawfare, delegitimisation of Israel, and all sorts of other red herrings that constitute anything but coming back to serious negotiations, which Israel is clearly interested in engaging in. The formation of the unity government backed by Hamas, which is still overtly and explicitly committed to violence and a one-state outcome and won't recognise Israel. We see the rockets attacking Israel just over the last week, incitement continuing. So what I think the Australian government has done is inject some reality into the situation.
It's been put to me by the former ambassador to Israel, Peter Rogers, that it's inevitable that Israel will now invite Australia to relocate its diplomatic delegation back to Jerusalem. Do you think that that is inevitable?
Well, I think the Israelis have been encouraging all parties to do that for a long time.
Will Australia resist, do you think?
Look, I think the Australian government will undertake an approach that is constructive, and it would be welcome if it went down that path. But the truth of the matter is, what they've done, I think, is a very useful and positive corrective to some of the extreme and misleading commentary about settlements that we've heard from prominent individuals in this country. They're putting the focus back on the real issues, which is on putting some sort of responsibility and accountability on the Palestinians to talk and to engage in serious negotiations.
Now, just briefly, Colin Rubenstein, on another topic. We've spoken to you before about Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, and you said that you had expressed your displeasure to your friend George Brandis on plans for the government to maybe alter that section. We're now hearing that there are expectations that he may back away from those proposed changes. Have you had a conversation with him about that? Do you know whether or not he will back down from those proposed changes?
No, I don't, but I'm encouraged by the large number of submissions that have been made on that issue, and encouraged that the government is obviously taking those submissions seriously. And so while I have no inside confidential knowledge whatsoever, given the tenor of public discussion and commentary on the coalition side and elsewhere, I'm hopeful some of those concerns will be taken into account and that the exposure legislation will be modified.
Colin Rubenstein, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much.
And Dr. Colin Rubenstein is Executive Director of the Australia